Being sentenced to death is very uncommon these days, but many prisoners have lost their lives due to their crimes. This has led some inmates to leave behind eerie last words that may haunt the prison warden for decades. But before we jump into it, be sure to hit that like button and ring the notification bell for more great videos. Manuel was a 31-year-old man who was arrested and convicted of taking the lives of 7 different people. He did this over the course of 2 years. For his final crime, he took the lives of an entire family who were innocently hanging out in their home one evening. After the crime, he lived inside of the family's home for several days, taking care of their cat and eating their food. He was obviously captured by police in the late 1950s and was taken to court. He shocked the entire room when he fired his lawyer on the spot and decided to represent himself. This was not a wise decision. His defense was that he never harmed any of the family members that evening. Instead, he pinned the crime on the father. While the judge was impressed by Peter's ability to handle himself in court and maintain his composure, he was still convicted and sentenced to be hanged. Just before the door dropped, he said, "Turn up the radio and I'll go quietly." Michael Carneal's crimes took place at Heath High School in Kentucky back in 1997. Michael opened fire on a group of students who were praying, claiming the lives of 3 and injuring 5. Carneal arrived at school after he had wrapped a weapon in a blanket, hiding his intentions from teachers and other students. When questioned by teachers regarding what was underneath the blankets, he told them it was an art project he had been working on. He showed up at 7:45 a.m., put in some earplugs, and began carrying out his vicious act on a group of religious students. According to a surviving member of the group, after Michael committed the crime, he dropped the gun on his own free will and surrendered to the school principal. He then turned to the principal and stated, "Kill me, please. I can't believe I just did that." While these may not have been the final words of his life, they were the eerie final words before being arrested and questioned by officers. Michael's trial was very quick, and he was sentenced in a matter of months. In October of 1998, Michael Carneal entered a guilty plea for his crimes, though he claimed it was due to mental illness. A judge ruled that Michael was to be placed in prison for 25 years with a possibility of parole in 2023. While in prison, Michael's been receiving mental health treatment for his illness and is doing his best to rehabilitate himself. Richard Cobb was a Texas man born in April of 1984. He was a high school dropout, and by the time he was 18, he had been involved in a serious armed robbery of a convenience store. During the robbery, he abducted 3 individuals who worked at the store. He stole their cars and drove the victims to a pasture where he had his way with them, leaving them in an awful state. 2 of these workers were female and the other was male. The male lost his life immediately in a tragic crime, however, the 2 women survived. After Richard had left the scene of the crime, the women ran to nearby homes and begged for help. They were able to identify their attackers, with Richard and his accomplice eventually being caught and sent to trial, where they were convicted and given an execution sentence. For his final words, Richard stated, "Life is death, death is life. Life is too short to harbor feelings of hatred and anger." As soon as the drugs began to kick in, he then proclaimed how great they made him feel and thanked the warden. Up until the moment of his passing, Richard showed no remorse for his actions. Between 1989 to 1990, Eileen Wuornos took the lives of at least 7 men. At the time, Eileen was self-employed as a street worker and claimed that each of these men had attempted to begin a sexual relationship with her without her consent. She claims that in all 7 cases, her actions were in self-defense. While she made compelling arguments in court, the jury decided that she was guilty and sentenced her to death on 6 different charges. Eileen is one of only a handful of female serial killers in the world. Throughout her trial, Eileen was regarded as having a psychopathic personality, as well as suffering from several personality disorders. Regardless, she was still considered to be sane. Moments before losing her life in prison, she said, "I'd just like to say that I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. Like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back." Jeff Weise was an American teen who committed several horrible crimes against children at school as well as his grandparents. On March 21st, 2005, Weise was at home with his grandparents. For unknown reasons, he took a weapon which he had purchased about a year earlier and taken the lives of both his grandmother and his girlfriend. He then stole his grandfather's police car and headed toward his high school. When he arrived, he took his weapon and claimed the life of a 28-year-old security guard before entering the building. The events that unfolded after this are far too tragic to explain, but many of the people who were at the school that day had their lives stolen from them. One student who survived claimed Jeff's final words were, "Do you believe in God?" After Jeff's deed was done, he went to a nearby classroom and ended his own life. After speaking with Jeff's family, police were told that Jeff had been the victim of an extremely difficult home life. He had moved to numerous schools for a few years, battled with depression, and was even prescribed Prozac. Some doctors questioned if this medication could have caused the attack because it's not labeled for use in teens. Following the attacks, a total of $200,000 was raised and dispersed to the families of the victims, as well as Jeff's family, with a community leader insisting that Jeff's family suffered twice the pain as a result of the attack. Robert Gleason was a very strange prisoner. He wanted to be executed. He was originally sentenced to life in prison after he took the life of a man in 2007. However, once he was taken to prison, he claimed the lives of 2 other inmates, causing him to be sentenced to execution. What's almost unbelievable is that while awaiting his conviction, he stated that he would take the lives of however many people necessary to land him in the electric chair sooner. Eventually, he got his wish. Robert was found guilty and he was sentenced to the chair for his crimes. For his final words, he made this strange statement, "Well, I hope Percy isn't going to wet the sponge. Put me on the highway to Jackson and call my Irish buddies. God bless." This tragic attack was carried out by 14-year-old Barry Dale Lukatis, who took the life of his algebra teacher, holding his remaining classmates hostage for over an hour. On the day of the attack, Barry had come to school dressed as a Wild West gunslinger. He brought several weapons with him. Barry walked to the school from his home, where he entered his algebra classroom during the 5th period. He entered his algebra classroom and committed unspeakable acts. Police were called to the scene immediately after other students and teachers heard the attack take place. The remaining students in the classroom began to panic, at which time Barry turned to them and stated, "This sure beats algebra, doesn't it?" A statement which was quoted from the Stephen King novel, Rage. This would be the quote that echoed in the minds of all who were present that day for many years. After he committed these crimes, Barry would not allow any of the remaining students to leave the classroom. This caused the school's gym teacher, John Lane, to enter the classroom and bargain with Barry, at which time he told Barry that he would let him leave so long as he injured no one else. Barry then asked to use John as a hostage as he exited the building, to ensure he wasn't attacked or arrested. John courageously agreed. Though just as Barry was about to exit the classroom, John grabbed the weapon from him, wrestled him to the ground, and kept him subdued until police arrived at the scene. Barry was thankfully arrested and John received no serious injuries. In June of 1996, Barry was sent to a trial, leading him to plead insanity to all of the charges against him. During his interrogations by police and detectives, Barry said that his main sources of inspiration for the attacks were Stephen King novels and the film Basketball Diaries. Barry was eventually sentenced to 205 years in prison rather than being given a death sentence. Kelsey Patterson was a man given capital punishment after he was convicted in an attack that took the lives of 2 people. At the time, Texas law had only 2 options for him. He could be given life without the possibility of parole, or be granted a death sentence. Doctors soon found out that Kelsey was a paranoid schizophrenic who had insisted that he was being controlled by an electronic implant. He had been found wandering the streets naked shortly after the attack took place, and because of this, the state feared for what Kelsey may do if he were to ever escape. Because of this, he was sentenced to execution. Before he lost his life in prison in 2004, Kelsey's final words were, "I am not guilty of the charge of capital murder. Steal me and my family's money. My truth will always be my truth. Give me my rights. Give me my life back." This statement has led many to believe if Kelsey was truly innocent and one of his other personalities was responsible for the crime.